The first time I encountered the guardian ape in the Sunken Valley, I knew it'd be a challenge just from its monstrous size and the fact that it's a demented monkey with a sword in its neck. I was also already aware of the hidden second phase from watching YouTube clips, so that element of surprise was lost on me. However, what nobody told me was that I'd have to fight him again later in the Ashina Depths with another ape at the same time. I picked up Sekiro a few weeks ago thinking it would be a more tamed version of other Souls games, without the demons and monsters, and more grounded in reality. And it sort of is, but the way it uses Japanese mythological creatures and enemy types to convey a different kind of horror was a surprise to me. Sekiro is by all means an action-adventure game, but it's also a horror game. Not a traditional horror where you have jump scares and terrifying creatures, but the cosmic horror elements that FromSoft are well known for, just a lot more subtle. Bloodborne, for example, does this expertly with its gothic, Victorian-esque environments and frightening creatures that are gory, incomprehensible and otherworldly. It leans into this heavily, with the entire game practically being a love letter to H.P. Lovecraft himself. Elden Ring is slightly different. It's a straight up fantasy game with knights and dragons, but the cosmic horror elements, like Estelle and really anything in Caelid, is what makes the world unique from a game like Dragon's Dogma or Skyrim. You see, Sekiro kind of strays from this, with most if not all except 3 or 4 bosses are humanoid. The encounters you have with the non-humanoid enemies still have a familiar yet mystic phenotype. The guardian ape is a monkey, the giant coloured carp is a fish, and the great serpent is a snake. This pattern is mirrored in the names of some of the characters. You play as the wolf, your adoptive father is the owl, and you battle with fierce foes like Lady Butterfly. This draws directly from Japanese mythology and its depiction of animalism, attributing spiritual significance to animals. Animals are unpredictable, wild, and most importantly, morally ambiguous. The ape was once with a partner or wife, but when he accidentally ingested the parasite to be granted immortal life, his partner eventually died, leaving him alone for eternity, until we find him in a desolate pit to, at the very least, attempt to grant him a mercy killing that failed once before. The full story and lore behind the Guardian Ape is one of inherent tragedy, and it encapsulates the game's themes of the downsides of immortality. The appeal with animals and folklore in a more vibrant and realistic environment is one of the reasons why the horror elements of Sekiro stand out from other FromSoftware titles. Speaking of the environment in true FromSoft fashion, the further you go away from Ashina Castle and into late game areas, the more rural and mystical the areas become. These dark, haunted and corrupted locations are where we fight the most inhumane creatures. This also goes for the underground areas, where you may also find these headless demons in the depths of the castle, buried and forgotten by the people above ground. Most notably is Mibu Village, having a striking resemblance to Bloodborne's early and mid-game areas, with mobs of enemies patrolling the path and projectiles coming at you from all angles. This article I found on Sublime Horror from 2020 does a way better job at explaining this, and is in fact the reason why I thought I'd spend time making this video, as I haven't really seen it being discussed on YouTube. In one section, the writer Bronte Crawford explains this element of rural horror that is so subtle but effective in evoking emotions of dread and fear. By having us withdraw into these secluded locations, Sekiro drives us away from the samurai war zones and more heavily populated areas, from urban conflict to rural horror. In Sekiro, these bucolic locations have become corrupted, the ancient monsters and decrepit villages implying that these areas remain caught in the web of times past. Thus, the past in Sekiro is no longer a true source of comfort for its characters. Rather, for Wolf, it is a source of knowledge where secrets and objects are uncovered that allow the player insight into the story unfolding. As such, Sekiro makes use of global gothic horror traditions by having Wolf come face to face with the ghosts that lurk within these decaying, haunted locations, and uncovering aspects of history that remain unknown to those that exist firmly within the margins of everyday society. The Divine Dragon is the apex of this pattern, only accessed in the Divine Realm, a completely mystical location, and the source of immortality. We can't actually kill the Divine Dragon, but we need its tears to sever the ties to immortality. The end game of Sekiro has all these elements seep back into the world we were once somewhat comfortable roaming in, signaling the spread of corruption. It's now home to the demon of hatred, once the sculptor, a vile boss that a lot of people agree doesn't even feel like it's meant for this game because of the Bloodborne vibe. But that's exactly the point. Not to mention whatever is happening in this cutscene right here. To me, the horror in Sekiro is akin to something like The Mummy starring Brandon Fraser, or a mixture of Annihilation with its ecological mutations progressively turning the familiar into the unfamiliar, and A24's Midsummer with its rural setting and folk horror with paganism as a primary theme. It's subtle but progressive, and if not for the distinct, amazing combat that makes you feel like a legendary shinobi, and the traditional Japanese setting, then the difference between this and Bloodborne in its horror may only be the lighting.